Good afternoon, everyone. This is the Cloud Computing One Size Does Not Fit All webinar. We'll be starting in just a couple minutes as a couple more folks are signing on as we speak. And we're just going to give folks about another minute or two as we still see a couple folks jumping on. Just want to remind everybody who has just jumped on, we're just going to provide one more minute before we start the webinar here. Why don't we get started? I want to welcome everybody that is online. We have a large attendee list that has joined us today. We're still having a couple other folks join us. My name is Mike Bank. I'm the Vice President of the Managed Services and Business Development Group for Synoptic. Welcome to anybody that has already attended one of our webinars, and if you're new, our charter is really twofold. One is to inform and educate on the respective topic, and then secondly, present a framework for organizations to consider three things. One is how to achieve higher levels of operating efficiency within their IT. Second, reach appropriate levels of reliability, and that spans across people, process, and technology. And then third, realize heightened levels of IT that brings material and value back to the enterprise. Today's topic is choosing the right clouds for the best results, and I emphasize results, and more particularly, one size does not fit all. We're looking for three takeaways for everybody. One is, what is the why with cloud today? Second, selection criteria, landmines, lessons learned from current scenarios shared by some of the experts that we have speaking. And then third, a methodology of evaluation and selection. I want to remind everybody on the interface that you have on your screen today, there should be a Q&A capability there at the bottom, and we will be monitoring for those throughout the webinar. We will address these in the session and have the professionals address any questions that you've got. So during the course of the webinar, please submit those. And also as a reminder, at the end of the webinar, for those folks that are in attendance, everyone will receive the latest cloud white paper that we just completed. And for a lucky member that is still on the webinar at the end, we will give away a Microsoft Surface 4 bundle. Again, that will be at the very end. With that said, I want to introduce our panelists today. The first individual is Miles Feinberg, and Miles is the Vice President of Product Development for Synoptic. This gentleman holds 25 years of IT expertise. He's and held leadership positions within Motorola. He was the founder and CEO of Paper Cloud, cloud specialty firm and managed service provider, and more personally served as a leader over 100 cloud strategy and migration projects. Second guest speaker is Howard Cohen. Howard holds 35 years of experience of managing and leading IT engineering services for large organizations. Today, he is considered one of the industry's most respected independent authority on cloud. He's currently speaking on some of the largest stages for cloud computing consulting, including Microsoft's Worldwide Partner Conference, CompTIA's ChannelCon, and he even serves or has served on the advisory board for HP, IBM, Apple, Ingram Micro, and Citrix Platinum Council. So with that said, I want to have Howard and Miles dive right into the core of our discussion.
Thanks, Michael. This is Miles. Thanks for the great introduction and reminding us of how old we are now. Happy to be here. Howard?
Yeah, thanks, Miles. I'd like to start off with our agenda for today's presentation. As Mike pointed out, we're talking about how to select the services that the cloud services that best fit your specific needs. And at the end of this, hopefully you'll also come away realizing that cloud, there's no mystery in cloud. Cloud is a very pragmatic, very cost-effective way to manage IT and get done the things we need to get done. So in today's presentation, we're going to start off by talking about the fact that there is no cloud. And once we've proven that there is no cloud, we're going to talk about how that non-existent cloud began. How did cloud become the phenomenon that it has been for so many years now? We'll then focus in on probably the most important issue for anybody on this session today. How do I save money? How do I reduce costs using cloud computing strategies? Once we've covered that, we'll focus in on other ways to get more value from cloud computing. With that basis, with that foundation, we're then going to start to explore how to choose the right cloud services for specific needs. What are the things we look at? What are the criteria that we explore so that we can better understand which cloud services will serve us best? To take that a step further, Miles will join us at that point to talk about some real-world case studies, use cases in which customers, real live customers, from a variety of different background sizes and industries, each chose specific cloud services to get done very specific things they needed to get done. And that will hopefully bring to life all of what we've been talking about. At the end, we'd like to take just a little bit of time to make you familiar with Synoptic, a little more familiar, those of you who are new to Synoptic, and just give you a foundation of why we're here today with Synoptic talking about cloud computing. There'll be time at the end for Q&A, so I'd like to echo what Mike said earlier. You do have a question and answer console, and I see some people are already using it to let us know that there were some sound problems. Thank you very much. But please do use it throughout the presentation. We will be monitoring it. We will be looking for questions and stopping where we can to answer them in context. And if we don't get to do that, we will certainly save them for the end. So let's start off by talking about how there is no cloud. If you look at the commercials, if you listen to the marketing that so many cloud providers have been using, it sounds like they're telling you to go to the cloud. Go to the cloud. Let's take that to the cloud. Let's move to the cloud. As if the cloud were some big mystical entity somewhere that houses all of the computing power and all of the data and everything that you need to conduct IT in your business. That's wonderful, but doesn't exist. There is no single entity that we can point to that is the cloud. Rather than there being this big mystical, ignore that man behind the curtain, I am the great and powerful Oz, there is actually, well, there are many clouds. Matter of fact, there are tens of thousands of them. They're all over the place. They're all over the world. We don't always refer to them as clouds. As a matter of fact, in the industry, we typically refer to them more often as data centers. And each of these data centers is producing a service that some of us need to use and others don't. And there are other services that others choose. And well, some of these services, for example, include data backup. Some of you may remember a remote data backup. Well, now that's cloud data backup. Some of, anti-malware, anti-spam, antivirus. All of these are services you can now obtain from somebody else's data center, and their data center is referred to as a cloud data center. fundamental server and storage. Amazon Web Services, IBM SoftLayer, Microsoft Azure. There are many, many data centers that provide that cloud service to you, and you can choose which one you want. Productivity tools, Office 365 is a very good example. You can have your word processing, you can have your email, you can have your data storage, all put together in one service, but when you obtain it from one of many data centers all over the world. So there is no cloud, there are simply a lot of smaller clouds, and each of those clouds is physically a data center delivering services to you. So with that, let's take a quick look at how cloud began. This is a very pragmatic and simple thing. Integrators, and we've all worked with integrators. Synoptic is certainly an integrator of solutions. And when Synoptic began and many other companies began, integrators took hardware from many different sources, many different manufacturers, and software from a variety of different providers, and combined them. Now they chose the best. They chose what they thought were the best hardware and software components to build this better solution, this superior solution. And at a given point, some of them realized that some of the things they were building on customer sites for customers could be more efficiently delivered from their own data center. Why build one for this customer, one for that customer, one for the next customer, and build dozens of these over and over again when we could simply build one? We would manage it, we would keep our eye on it in our data center, and therefore have better control over the quality. Sounds like a great idea, better quality. Well, let's add to that just a little bit. What if we could deliver that better quality at a lower cost? Doesn't sound possible. And yet, cloud computing demonstrates that it is. Cloud computing basically provides an economy of scale. That economy of scale is created when you take that one infrastructure that you've built in your own data center and you use it to serve dozens or hundreds of customers. Each of those customers pays a fraction of what it costs for you to run that infrastructure, plus a reasonable profit. At the end of the day, you make a lot more money, and yet each of the customers involved pays a lot less because they're not paying for the entire infrastructure to be built on their premises. They're just paying to use it in your data center. So cloud computing achieves this economy of scale that allows all customers to pay less and yet enjoy a higher level of service. So today, integrators have a wonderful new opportunity. Yes, there's still some hardware involved. We all use desktop and laptop computers or tablets or smartphones. Those are all certainly hardware. And we may run some applications locally, certainly an operating system, some other utility software or special purpose software that we still want to run locally. But at the same time, we can connect to these different cloud data centers to obtain services. So today's integrator takes hardware and software to some extent and then becomes expert at combining the right services to deliver the superior solution each customer needs. Some of you may be wondering how they ended up calling it cloud. Why cloud? And realistically, there were some companies that in the beginning called it utility computing. Personally, I think that was a better term, a more descriptive term. It's a utility like phone or water, electric, and gas. It's the computing utility. But in the early days, and today, even today, technologists illustrate their network solutions on a whiteboard. They draw their network.
Howard?
Yeah.
I'm sorry to interrupt. Why do they always draw it like that, in that shape? Why do you draw it like that?
Well, very simply, try to imagine how, and Miles, if you have a better answer, man, I would love to hear it because I've been challenged with this. The internet is huge. It's massive and highly complex. There's billions of different components going on. How do you depict all of those in this framework? How do you put them all on the whiteboard? And the answer that most engineers came up with back in the day was they would draw it as a blob. They would just draw a blob on the screen and say, that's the internet, okay, for lack of a better illustration. Now, at some given point, somebody sitting somewhere in one of these whiteboard presentations said, you know, that looks like a cloud. And so instead of calling it the internet blob, they decided, and it may have been a marketer, who said, let's call it the internet cloud. And so cloud stuck. And it has stuck longer than I think any buzzword in our industry ever has. People have seized upon cloud computing because it is a viable way to get better service at a lower price. So now, this is probably the point that everybody's been waiting for, and certainly from an end user standpoint, these are the things that end users really want to understand, especially those who are responsible for operations and finance in their organizations. How does the cloud reduce costs? How does it do that? And when speaking about this, you know, those of you who have read about this in the press, you've probably run into the terms CapEx and OpEx. CapEx meaning capital investments, capital expenditures, buying hardware, buying property to put on in your facility to operate IT. And OpEx, operating expenses, the cost of operating that equipment, keeping it running, keeping it performing, keeping it available to your users. CapEx and OpEx. So let's define how cloud addresses both of these ways of spending money. Starting with CapEx. Look around your own environment and think about how many servers do you have in your environment today. Some of you will probably respond, well, we've only got one or two. Others have a dozen, maybe 2 dozen. There are maybe some of you who are on the call today who have hundreds of servers in their server farm, and maybe a few of you who have even thousands. You have lots of servers. When the time comes that you've fully depreciated them and it's time to replace them, how much is that going to cost? It's going to cost thousands for those of you who have few, tens of thousands for those who have more, hundreds of thousands, millions for those of you who have very large operating infrastructures for your information technology. It's going to cost a lot of money. Now add to that all of the storage gear, all of the network and communications equipment, routers and switches and such, all the power conditioning, everything else you have on premise to enable you to manage IT. How much is it going to cost to replace all of that? Again, it's a big number. Well, in the context of the cloud, it's going to be possible for us to wipe out all of those investments. If not most, certainly some, and many have actually eliminated all capital investments. They no longer buy any servers. They no longer buy any storage, not much beyond fundamental routers to get them to the internet. Eliminate capital investments. Now, where does all that go? Well, we'll get back to that in a moment. Now let's look at the OpEx side and see how all of this impacts our operating expenses. First of all, if you don't buy new equipment, when you get rid of the old equipment, you'll have empty space. And you won't need that space because you're not replacing that equipment. You don't need room to house equipment you no longer own. You may rent that space out. You may sell buildings, depending on your circumstances, depending on whether you have a network closet or a full-blown data center. You've got a lot of real estate you can now put to other use or turn into income. Since you no longer own equipment, you no longer have to power that equipment. And it's been approximated that it costs about $1,000 per server per year to power the equipment. Imagine having hundreds or thousands of servers, $1,000 per server saved every year from now on. You'll have a reduced cost of data backup and redundancy because many of the cloud services, if not most, offer built-in redundancy, built-in data backup. And when you're using large providers, they've got multiple data centers that fail over. So your data is always preserved, always protected, no matter what. We'll talk more about that later on. If you don't have any equipment, you don't have to cool that equipment. Again, we're talking about a savings of about $1,000 per server. So again, count the number of servers you have, multiply by 2,000, and that's your potential annual savings when you move your IT operations to cloud computing. You don't have to maintain equipment you no longer own. You no longer need staff to run equipment that you no longer own. You will reduce the cost of unused resources. Now, let's take a minute and we'll come back to that because I think it's worthwhile to focus on that point. But most important is you take all of this and you replace it with a fixed, predictable, budgetable recurring operating expense. Now, the gentleman on the right there is a CFO, and he's got pictures of dollar signs floating in his head. Well, those are real dollar signs, and he knows just how many, because when you are subscribing to cloud services, you know in advance how much you're going to be spending. You can budget it, you can forecast it, you can predict it, and those are the three things any financial officer wants to do most. So let's take a look now back at the issue of unused resources. And to do so, what we're looking at is a server and that server's storage. Okay, the storage drive on the right there, it's about a 4 terabyte storage drive. And we've had it for a couple of years. And now it's reaching capacity. It's getting full. So we know we need to expand it. The question is, how much? Well, common wisdom says, oh, well, double it. You know, let's get another 4 terabytes and add it to that. That may be overkill, it may be underkill. Some people say you've got to double it. If you're growing, you know, take what you have now, double it and add that again. So now we've got 12 terabytes of storage available to our server. One thing we know for sure is that on day one, the new 8 terabytes that we've just purchased are not doing anything. They are sitting there perfectly idle. And therefore, all the investment we've made is paying back nothing, nothing at all. Now, a few days later, we start to use a few gigabytes, and a month or two down the road, we're using more gigabytes, and maybe within 6 months, we're already using one of the terabytes. Well, if we're up to 1 terabyte, we still have 7 terabytes that are sitting there completely idle. We're paying for them, we've paid for them, but we're not getting any benefit out of them. Let's take a look at how that works in the framework of cloud computing. With cloud computing, you're not going to issue a purchase order. You're not going to order new storage equipment. You're not going to wait for it to arrive, wait for it to be configured, wait for it to be installed, wait for it to be available. You're not going to wait for any of that. You're going to simply go to a self-service portal, and you're going to say, I need more storage. I need 2 terabytes more. Or maybe I need another 6 terabytes. So now I've got a total of 10. Or maybe you need 14 terabytes. Okay, so you've pushed the throttle, and all that is answering questions or clicking buttons on a console saying, I need more storage. You could certainly do this for more memory, for more processing capability. All of these resources are available from a cloud pool of resources that you can simply sum it up as you need them. Now let's say that you needed that additional 10 terabytes for a seasonal requirement. You've got a big uptick in business during the summer months, or you ran a promotion that's going to drive tons of customers to your website and bring in tons and tons of data, or you did a survey, or you had any one of a number of other projects that you had to complete that required another 10 terabytes of storage. Now that project is over. The storage is all recorded off onto storage media, archive media. You don't need that 10 gigabytes anymore. You simply go back to the self-service portal and get rid of them, release them. They go back to the pool where they're available to anybody else who needs them. So in cloud computing, you can request and release resources as and when you need them. And the beautiful thing about cloud computing, you're only paying for what you use when you use it. Here's another huge financial advantage of cloud computing. You can request resources, pay for them while you're using them, and then when you release them, you stop paying for them. Again, very predictable, easy to forecast, easy to budget. So huge value. You save on all these operating expenses. You're not making any more capital investments. It's simply a fixed subscription fee per month, per quarter, whatever period you choose, and it only flexes when your resource requirements flex, and you're in total control of that, both on and off. Okay, so let's look for more value coming from the cloud. And we've talked about how it's lower cost with higher service levels, and we've demonstrated just how cloud achieves that. There's really nothing else that works that way. Also, you don't have to make any upfront investments to get started. You simply subscribe to the service. Nothing to install, nothing to configure, nothing to have built into your premises. Just subscribe. We've seen how we can turn capital investments into operating expenses, and many operating expenses just go away. All of this makes this very budgetable, very predictable. Those of you who are on our webinar today who are from the financial side of your business will find cloud computing solving many of your issues, many of your challenges with funding IT. Then there's the other element of value, which is the element of business agility. And I'll simply illustrate that by asking the question, how quickly do you want to respond to a new opportunity? Customer issues an RFP. You hear that a customer is building a new facility and they need your products and your services as part of what they're building. Would you prefer to be the first one to respond with a proposal? Would you prefer to be fifth, ninth? I think you'll all agree. The early bird catches the worm. You want to be there first, and you want to be there first with the best possible information. So you need to be able to get to all of the answers you need to create your proposal as quickly as possible. That's what cloud computing provides. All of the resources you need, whether you need more memory, more storage, more processing to build your proposal, whether you need access to information from all over the world, now you have access to all of that, and it's ready access, it's immediate access. Greater business agility doesn't mean that you have bet the farm. Your cost of making this happen, as we've illustrated earlier, is very low. You're in for a penny. You're not in for, with both feet and totally committed. You can go in a very inexpensive manner. You can try things before you buy them. You may think a service sounds fantastic, so you subscribe to it. And 30 days later, not so much. You simply end your subscription. Try that with a couple of $100,000 worth of hardware and software that you invested in and had installed. Not so easy to change course midstream. Here's an issue that I think the folks at Synoptic certainly get asked about all the time. It's a very common question. Do I have to make a wholesale move to the cloud? Do I have to take everything IT and just move it over there? And the answer is a resounding no. Anybody who's ever managed IT knows the worst thing in the world is to try to boil the ocean, try to get everything done at once. Nobody wants to do it, and with cloud, you don't have to do it. You can pick and choose the workloads that you'd like to shift. Maybe you want to start with low-risk workloads, some document repositories or whatnot. You probably don't want to start with email as the first thing you move. You want to be sure that you've got the great performance you're looking for from your cloud providers before you commit your high-value, high-risk workloads to the cloud. And you can. You can pick and choose what you want to transition, when you want to transition it, and how you want to transition it. And if you have any questions, the reason that we're giving this webinar today, you'll see in the case studies and in the answers to your questions later that the folks at Synoptic have the answers to the questions that come up. They've helped thousands of customers make these transitions. They've experienced all of the pitfalls, and they can give you early warning on what to look out for when moving particular workloads. That detailed experience is tremendously valuable when moving to any new platform, including the cloud. Hopefully what you've gleaned from all of this is that the most important, most powerful value that cloud provides to us is the value of having choices. Okay? You don't have to pick the cloud server capability or the cloud productivity suite or the cloud anti-malware. It's not like there's just, again, this one big blob of cloud that has everything, and that's what you've got to use. Doesn't exist, doesn't work like that. You can choose from many different anti-malware providers. You can choose from many different cloud backup providers, many different productivity suite providers, many different email and messaging providers, and many different fundamental infrastructure as a service providers. So you have fundamental server and storage coming from Amazon, Microsoft, IBM, Google, Synoptic, and many others. So with all these choices, the question becomes, how do you choose? How do you pick the one that's best for you? Well, if we went into tremendous detail, we would be here for days because there's an awful lot to learn. But this is a checklist, and in looking at the checklists from that Synoptic uses, this is very similar to the checklist Synoptic uses to evaluate new cloud providers before they'll recommend them to clients. And Synoptic has the experience and the expertise on board to make each of these evaluations for you, with you, but these are the things that you really do want to look at. First and foremost, you want to look at service quality. Well, what does that mean? It's got to be easy to use. It's got to be easy to administer. It's got to have all the features that you're looking for in the service that you want to take advantage of to get done the things you want to get done. You want to know that the provider has a huge reputation for support as documented in many very positive customer reviews. And high quality providers will always have plenty of customer reviews and customers to introduce you to who will be glad to talk to you on their behalf and tell you about their experience. You want to know that the cloud provider you're using is financially stable, that they've been around for a while, that they're going to be around to support you in years to come. You want to know that they adhere to technology standards that make them easily interoperable with other platforms. You want to know that they use standard operating systems, standard platforms, that they're not using some self-designed proprietary standards that nobody else will be able to connect to. You want to know all of their requirements, how much CPU is required, how much memory is required in a client device to be able to access their resources. What are they doing about data, network, and access security? What are the investments they've made? That's a very important point that you must take a good hard look at, because if you're trusting your data and your workloads to a cloud provider, you want to know that those workloads and those data assets are very, very well protected. You want to know that they have very clear operational standards that they can show you, a methodology that they have proven, that they have built in resilience and redundancy. If a cloud provider has one data center, they don't have enough data centers. They need to have multiple data centers, and each data center has to be far, far away from the others, outside the blast radius of a nuclear device if, God forbid, one gets attacked. It sounds terrible, but you do have to plan for the worst case scenario. You want to know that their systems are manageable, that they interoperate easily with others, that they're compatible, that they will grow with you, that they're scalable, so that as your company grows, they grow. And the systems that they're using will still be responsive at very large capacity as they are at very small capacity. And then finally, at the bottom line, look at the bottom line. Look at the costs involved. Don't forget to look at licensing. In many environments, licensing is extra, and you don't find that out until it's a nasty surprise. So always be conscious that licensing of software that you're using in the cloud is an issue. It's an issue that you need to explore, and a quality engineer, a quality consultant will bring that up way before you do. Finally, take a look at how those costs change as you grow. You don't want to find yourself in an environment for some period of time and then suddenly discover that because you got larger, their price moved out of sight and you now have to transition. So take a look at your costs, not only today, but costs over time as you scale. With that, I'd like to take all of this and turn it into real-world terms. Synoptic, as I mentioned, has served thousands of customers over the years. And we've selected some examples of customers that Synoptic has helped to make the transition to cloud under various different conditions. To talk to you more about them, I'd like to reintroduce someone who's got much closer touch and feel with these individual customers. Miles, why don't you pick it up?
Thanks, Howard. So those values you talked about, that's kind of interesting. Remember you put up try before you buy?
Yeah.
That's one of the mantras that we use as we, for all the services that we put forward. Why don't you move forward here and we can talk about some of these case studies. This company is an agricultural chemical producer in North America, South America, Asia, Africa, and Europe. They have infrastructure in all of those locations. Now, there's something really interesting, I don't even think Mike, Howard, you guys even know about it. Now, get this. Their internal IT folks actually wanted to get out of IT and move into other strategic areas of the business, like the robotic automation of the factory, marketing, for example. They're like, we're out of here. They actually said that. So this was one driving factor for them. The staff were actually, this IT staff were scheduled to start these other exciting jobs within the company. So they said to us, we don't even want to have servers. So when they were looking at us, they loved our IT management support model. It was the best of all the firms actually that they looked at. And on their needs list, they wanted to have a system architect one. And they looked at Amazon Web Services. They charged like an extra $10,000 a month just for that level of support. Also, they liked that the resources could be changed in tiny increments, which is more cost-effective than buying the templated VMs. So they like that extremely granular ability to control costs that we uniquely we had. You spoke to it, but we do it to an extreme. They love that we manage Oracle, Windows, Active Directory, file and print services, and VoIP. Actually, one of their requirements was to put their Cisco VoIP in the cloud, and as this wasn't certified to run in AWS, they had to rule out AWS to ensure consistently high quality of their calls. The warranty on all their old hardware was expiring. They had a co-location center renewal coming up. And again, remember, their IT folks were starting new positions. So we had to execute a cloud migration on a really tight timeline, and we did that superbly.
Hmm.
You can go to the next one.
You know,
Miles, it's Mike. One of the things I love about this company is they purposely kept their IT team, but they had them focus on new roles, like you said, and they moved more into innovation versus operating, and that sounds like a big takeaway here.
Absolutely.
yeah, I was going to say, Mike, that Miles, I think that we've all considered cloud at some time or another to be competition to the IT team in an organization, but I think this particular case study proves it's quite the opposite. You know, when you move off to cloud, you can free up your people to do much more interesting and much more rewarding work.
All right. I want to leave a lot of time for Q&A, but I want to give you guys the highlights and interesting and important points on these things. We have 5 total. This is the second one. This organization is a rapidly growing chain of LASIK surgery centers. They had divested from the parent company and needed to be off the parent company system. So they entered into a competitive selection. It was just before Thanksgiving where they gave us a call. Nobody's around. They told us they needed to be off everything, explored, managed, and completely migrated, vetted, tested by the end of the year, or they'd have major cost. Now they had a system with centralized data, and if those systems are down, they can't perform procedures. The cost would be very significant, and of course customer satisfaction. They liked that we could migrate, manage, host, and we had lots of healthcare experience. And we hit that date and avoided their penalty costs. And then in subsequent phases, we went on to help them select their electronic health record system, leveraging our healthcare expertise. You can go on to the next one.
Okay.
So I'm going to take this point just to introduce a program called the Cloud OS Network. Some background. As you all know, Amazon Web Services was the first large-scale cloud provider. And Microsoft came into the game afterwards, and they have been playing catch-up. But their focus in the past several years has been in the enterprise space. And their newer platform has more modern architecture and arguably an easier set of controls.
Miles,
so
just a quick question for you. So Microsoft has partnered with Synoptic to provide this Cloud OS network service. What was Microsoft looking to Synoptic for to add to their own offerings?
Great question. Why did Microsoft even need to have a program to partner with firms like Synoptic? So Microsoft saw that there were underserved niches in the market limiting cloud adoption. And they decided to vet some select few firms to partner with the intent of giving those firms the actual Azure Stack intellectual property to build onto to fill those gaps. So they established a program called the Cloud OS Network, and they selected just 18 firms in the U.S. that they entrusted to do this.
That's
vetted. So
that's really impressive, given that there are about 45,000 Microsoft partners in the U.S. That's amazing.
Right, and even when you narrow the field to the thousands of hosting partners and gold level hosting partners, it still has extra zeros on it beyond the 18 that were actually selected. And of course, we're very proud, and Microsoft put a great deal of investment into it. They really had to vet us, paying third parties, and we worked together. Again, they wanted us to expand and extend to meet the needs of the customers that required, in our case, managed cloud and compliance. So the next few case studies that we're going to talk about leverage that platform that we built to serve that market that we partnered with Microsoft on. If you want to go to the next one. So this is a large glowing insurance services firm. They have automation of real-time policy management for their clients. So performance and uptime are critically important to them. They were looking for scalability, a modern, efficient platform, data privacy, They had endless CapEx surprises. Howard explained that those endless, hey, we need another 8 terabyte SAN server, so forth, that they had to buy up front and that were aging and needed to be replaced. They were looking to have a very high performance level for the systems that were available to their staff as well, the automation systems that they had. So they wanted a provider who could provide dedicated lines to between the data center and their office for that performance. And of course, they needed experienced cloud migration leadership. So they went out, performed a competitive bidding process that Synoptic won, and we were able to guide and execute a very successful cloud adoption project. Next. This next case study is the Midsize chain of dental offices, centralized dental applications. They were originally based out of Nevada. They had toured several data centers. They decided on one of the best that's out there, which was SuperNap in Nevada. They were considering co-location, basically renting the space from that provider and parking their own hardware in there. And then they quickly realized this was way above their head. So they wanted the ability to migrate their VMs and manage them, manage the firewall. They loved having that Azure control panel, and they wanted the ability to scale up quickly. And of course, they have private health information, so they needed a business associates agreement, someone who understood those requirements, who could stand by them. And they considered a lot of other providers who could host in Nevada, in the data center of their choice, they felt most comfortable with, but no one else could meet all those needs. Go to the next one. Howard? Okay, great. So this is a medical imaging company. These guys have a unique solution that adds value to the data they hold. The business is growing. The application they have, obviously, to their success. The problem they had, they was with a smaller provider, and they were experiencing lasting outages. Being in the medical space, once again, they needed to be HIPAA compliant, have their business associates agreement side, not someone else's. They wanted their core applications managed. So their selection was driven by having hosting that met their needs, of course, and that is specifically a private high-performance storage array, and they had medical images in large quantity. So they wanted really high performance on the storage. They couldn't get that elsewhere. They needed a customized backup schedule by their usage patterns and their application needs. They really liked having IT management and hosting services all under one roof to avoid the finger pointing of responsibilities. They considered going to AWS, by the way, but AWS couldn't do any of that. So those are the case studies. Turn it back over to you, Howard.
Great, thanks, Miles. I just wanted to focus in briefly on the cloud methodology. We mentioned earlier that methodology is important. Knowing that your provider knows what they're doing is a key issue. And you know, in working with the folks at Synoptic, I've seen their methodology, and they can show you their methodology, which is somewhat unique, but truly valuable. They thoroughly understand their customers' goals and objectives. Every IT project begins and ends with the customer, and that's something I've seen Synoptic recognizes. It's more than understanding it, it's documenting it, documenting everything that's going on in your current environment so that we know where we're coming from before we determine where we're going to. They then help you to identify and select the best of breed software and the best of breed services you need to get done what you need to do. And the thing I personally have found that I appreciate most about their approach is that they're completely agnostic. They are not this one's partner, that one's partner. They're truly consultative, and they identify truly the best of breed for, best of breed is best of breed for you. There is no such thing as a one-size-fits-all solution, as we titled this thing. So their methodology assures consistent, reliable interoperability. I can't stress enough the importance of the focus they place on that, especially as we move now into the Internet of Things, where you're going to have devices all over the planet from thousands of different manufacturers, all trying to talk to each other over one network, the Internet. They've got to be interoperable, and somebody has got to assure that they all play well together. And Synoptic has taken on that challenge and has executed on it already for many, many customers. They'll take care of provisioning services for you. You don't have to suddenly learn how to make that happen. They'll deploy any hardware involved, software involved, and certainly the services, the cloud services that you use. They'll train users. They support your user community on an ongoing basis on any of the services that you're using. They're a big part of your ongoing operation, the support you need to make sure that your ongoing operation keeps going on. And best of all, they dedicate somebody who becomes your cloud advisor, somebody that you can turn to at any time, who knows your environment, who knows the history, and who has access to all of the specifications needed to properly manage and effectively manage your environment. So with that, what I'd like to do is turn it back to Mike for a very, very quick look at the Synoptic itself, and then we'll lead right into Q&A.
Thanks, Howard. That's a quick commercial. We'll just blaze through this real quick, but everyone can see that we are a national firm. As it relates to the cloud infrastructure, we do host everything in a Tier 4 facility. We think from the ground up that that is critically important. I do want to move to the questions here, guys. So I'm going to ask that we slide forward, answer the Q&A, and then go into the drawing for the Microsoft Surface tablet.
Okay.
So with that, we did have a couple questions that have come in, and I've been writing a couple of them down. The first question is, how are cloud data centers not as susceptible to natural disasters as my corporate office may be? Related question, where should someone consider the best place or low risk for systems to reside?
I can take that, Mike, if you like.
Please.
Yeah, okay. That's a great question. I mean, to start with the fact that data centers are better prepared to weather the storm, figuratively storm, redundant power, redundant internet feeds, backup generators, and the like. However, if you think back like to Hurricane Sandy, I think that was 5 or so years ago on the East Coast, it took down several data centers. And I remember firms, they were out of commission. A lot of businesses were affected for other reasons, but firms and data centers were out for almost a week. So some cloud services offer geo-redundant storage. It's not the default, and if you go, like, for example, in public Azure, the geo-redundant storage is like 2.5 times the price of standard storage. But the best bet is to actually locate your data where the minimum of natural disasters could have an impact. If you were to look at one of those geographic maps of the U.S., looking at where all the threat patterns are, you have West Coast has earthquakes, the Southeast hurricanes, the Central has tornadoes, ice storms in the north, and the East is floods. So really, if you were to try to avoid those, you're kind of left with Nevada and Idaho as being relatively risk-free, and then you don't have to rely or worry about those other systems as quite as much.
Agreed. Southwest with very minimal geologic and threats. 3 questions came in right next to each other on a topic that is probably the most discussed and challenged topic, and that is around security. So let me separate the first one here. So a question regarding security and network links, although, and I'm just kind of paraphrasing here, dedicated network links are extremely expensive. Discuss applications over the internet versus the costly provision of network links directly to a data center, and what safeguards should be considered?
I can
All
say,
right. Oh, go ahead. I mean,
no, go ahead, Miles.
Mike, who do you want? All right. All right. So I'm going to preface this, that I could talk for quite a while about security. So later you can reach out to me and happy to engage on that. Trying to keep it as concise as I can. Remember, cloud providers live, eat, and breathe network security, while most other organizations don't list it as one of their core competencies. So there's always a concern, is going to cloud safe? It boosts your security in a way that you're never going to be able to afford to. Because again, cloud providers have economies of scale to acquire those cutting-edge security appliances, have dedicated staff to run and monitor them, and of course, the reputation depends on it. But a big misconception is that the cloud provider automatically looks after all security needs of the customer's data and processes in the cloud. So about that, dedicated connection. You can use the public internet. You can use encryption over the wire. That should address most of the security. You don't necessarily have to have a dedicated link, which agreed is expensive. I would use dedicated more for performance than security. The thing that, there's a limit to what the cloud provider is going to give you. So it's going to provide a degree of perimeter, physical security and network security. But once you get to the operating system and certainly the application and then all the interaction with your trusted users, that's where you need, password policies, ensure there's software patches, management of user roles, security training of your staff, data management policies. They're all the customer's responsibility, and they are at least as critical as the security being done by the cloud provider. And just to kind of wrap it up, let me add some other things here. You need multiple layers of security. I heard the question about that, just the line that goes to the data center. You need defense in depth. There isn't a single silver bullet. So, and consider that the systems are often compromised by exploiting human weaknesses using phishing or other social engineering techniques. So have systems that safeguard and watch over end user devices. And I'll wrap up, I want to point one more thing out. The number one most common security threat is actually your own employees. For most organizations, statistics at intentionally, many of them become disenfranchised and look to even sell access or data from your own systems because they can. So my last piece of advice would be to ensure that you have security measures that watch for anomalous activity.
Miles, there's another question that's coming out. We only have 2 minutes here, but organizations that are held to ISO standards like 2700 and PCI, what's really the best approach for them to ensure trust with a cloud provider? What things should they do or they look for in the cloud provider?
You're going to look for a cloud provider that's met those same standards that can roll up to you and have transparency around that. You may need to sign some NDA to get a different degree of information if that requires. That doesn't relinquish you and your organization from meeting those same controls within your business and the areas that you control.
I want to add something to that, Miles. Many organizations ask us, well, we have to look for cloud providers that are certified, and that is not the case. Now, your auditors are the best person to go to look at your risk mitigation, but just because you might be PCI compliant doesn't mean that you need a cloud provider that's PCI certified. Make sure that your control objectives map to those of the cloud provider and vice versa. And again, draw the distinction between certification that's needed and compliant. The last question that I've got here is, can you name the top reasons that cloud providers may fail a subscriber?
Okay, I'll take that one as well, and in the essence of time, I'll be brief. So some of the reasons are not having a plan, or maybe a plan that accounts for the unique needs an organization has, like syncing real-time data. Organizations sometimes don't have the right tools. They migrate non-virtualized workloads. They only migrate virtualized workloads, and then they have to start over or deviate. Sometimes it's the plan itself, attempting to combine too much into a cloud migration project, like maybe a major re-architecture as versus let's start with just a lift and shift. Similarly, treating it as all or nothing. Shift the workloads to the cloud that makes sense, like Howard mentioned. Some legacy applications could stay on-premise, or data that you might not want to leave the office for security or performance reasons. And then have a test environment and make sure you test under load.
Good.
That's what I got.
Thank you. We're going to wrap up on time here. I want to remind everybody that this recording will be live, and there were about 4 more questions that did not go answered. I do have the names of those folks. You'd be feel free, please, to reach out to us. Our contact information is there. You may get a call from Miles just to make sure that everything is your questions are being asked. We might take a little proactive stance there, so we will take care of that. And then I want to go to the winner of the computer here, the Microsoft Surface Pro. And based on those folks that are still on the phone and attentive, the individual that wins this is Curtis Helsel. Sorry if I mispronounced your last name there, but Curtis, we will be in touch with you for the prize and send that out to you. On the screen you hear how to learn more, how to contact us about any remaining questions, the white paper to everybody, and have the webinar online. Thank you very much for another successful edition of our Synoptic webinar series. Everyone have a great morning.